morning, everyone. As Dennis mentioned, my name's Mike. I'm going to use cheat sheet today. I had full intention of going back and working on my presentation last night, but I linked up with a couple devils who shall not be named. Ones are working the camera, and it cut into my prep time significantly. Okay, so I want to give you a quick resume of me, just so you know why I'm here and how I got here. I actually met Dennis in Germany. It was the first time I met Dennis last year. It was just after I had become part of the WEX organization. My background is I went to school. I'm a chemist by training, which applies a lot into welding and joining technology. My experience with welding is I've soldered copper pipes at home. I've used Legos. But I've never really welded, so and in fact, I'm working through some of the American Welding online courses right now, which I highly encourage you to check out. They're really fundamentally good, and they're very useful. So please don't ask me any in-depth welding questions. I will just lie. So today, what I'd like to talk about is really how to help get standards incorporated into the academic environment, specifically in your case into training young students to know more about welding. Getting back to my background. So I started in the Army, then I went into the chemical business. I was an R&D chemist in the process area, so my job was taking functional goo and making it on a large scale and then ultimately getting into applications. Had a great opportunity to travel and see customers, and that kind of got me excited into the sales and marketing side of that business. Ultimately, the chemical business went through several right sizings as they moved things south, then west or east, depending on which boat they took. And I made a jump into scientific or scholarly publishing with the American Chemical Society. I've worked in scholarly publishing thereafter for the last 20 years, and that gets me to working with WEX, which is, as Dennis mentioned, the fulfillment partner and institutional sales partner for the publications of AWS. So my premise today is really to talk about how we get standards, how we can help you incorporate standards into a greater extent training students so that they're more prepared for the real world. And I'll try to explain what that means. Don't take anything personally if you're already doing this. So my premise is that knowledge of standards and codes is essential. It's required, and as we heard yesterday from Dave, that employers want students to be educated. And I think David just showed you in some of his stats that there is a skills gap between just doing the activity versus getting beyond that in a greater scope of understanding how the technology, how the science, how the activity actually fits into a bigger picture. I also know from my experience, I've had a chance to go all the way around the world. I've been, I think, 88 countries, which has taught me three things. One, I like kimchi more than I like sushi. Two, I love America. And three, that schools essentially all have the same hurdles. Budget's a big one. Figuring how do you incorporate theoretical work into real life so that you send forth kids that are productive in society. So I think what we learn worldwide is that we're all in the same boat, and if we can figure out how to solve problems here, we can figure out how to solve it elsewhere in the world. And the best place to solve it's here in the States because we generally get there first. So to do that, I know you go through a lot of hurdles as schools. We're all busy. We're all strapped financially. And hopefully we'll come up with some ways that can help you incorporate standards into the way you train your students in a financially feasible way and overcome these obstacles. And if so, there's lots of benefits to be gained by doing this, and that's hopefully where I'll get to in the period of time. Oops, what have I done? In the period of time that's been shortened because David took way too long. Okay, background. Standards have been around for thousands of years. I know you know of this, but let's just give you some examples. As far back as 3000 BC, weights and measures were uniformly put together. Then, of course, my buddy Marcus Vitruvius Polio became the first engineer just before the birth of Christ. And then the Magna Carta was established, and it also contemplated the use of standards, which I'm eventually going to get this right. Where's the page? And in Clause 35 of the Magna Carta, I have to point out they actually developed one of my favorite standards, which is uniform measurement of beer. So there's a link there if you really want to read it yourself. But anyway, so the point here is that the concept of doing things in a uniform way has been around for a long time. To belabor that point, standards are really an agreed upon way of doing things. There's standards for virtually everything we do. Could be technical definitions, could be how you develop a light switch. You all know this. If a standard becomes incorporated into a law or part of a contract, it becomes what's called code. Then you have technical specs, which I can tell you in the Army we relied on heavily, mil specs. Didn't get involved as a user. Thank God my tank and my weapon worked right. But thanks to the very defined ways of building the tools of the trade, it helped very good. And of course, at very local levels, like when I was in the chemical business, we developed standard operating procedures, which are a way of, standardized way of actually doing an activity, which you all know about as well. Then as the concept of standards evolved, so did the need to have a way of controlling those standards. Standard development organizations began to sprout as the Industrial Revolution happened. If you look, I've listed just a few here. If you kind of tie them to the dates and what's inspired those standard development organizations to begin, you see that they're developed as a way of finding good ways to solve very real problems of the time. And of course, standards bodies have evolved as technology and civilization evolved. So you can see that that ASME started in 1880. Boilers were blowing up and killing people. So they said, well, we need to find a better way to control the process of building boilers, and so forth. Down to the very bottom, which is my favorite, the American Welding Society began in 1919. Dennis pointed that out yesterday. Really began as a way to make better tools for the war machine in World War II. And of course, you know the evolution of AWS since then. So really, why am I telling you all this? And hopefully there is some new information there. And I know there's a lot of text on the screen. I really tried desperately to put more pictures, but I lost my creativity last night about midnight. But really the key here is that we need to solve problems in the world. And industry has known this for a long time. Industry knows there's a need to do things in a standardized way for everyone's safety, for greater efficiency, for uniformity of products and services delivered. Academia has long taught kids, taught people. And the key is, how do we bring that together? And community colleges, in my opinion, are the perfect hybrid that do just that. My father was an adjunct professor at a community college in Ohio where I grew up, and he taught about chemistry. He was a chemist too. I told him I'd never become one, and I did. But since that time, the evolution of how community colleges serve the local community, the regional community, has really grown significantly. And of course, as community colleges, you handle a lot of things. We've heard all about it the last couple of days, but things like transfer education to 2+2+2, career development, career enhancement. There's a lot of people that are out of work today that are looking to retrain themselves and get back into the workforce in a productive way. It seems like they should be going into welding based on the numbers we've seen. But ultimately, community colleges are a great way to take practical application of knowledge and put it out in the workforce in a meaningful way and serve the community with the kids that you develop and send out into community college, or out into the community. But going back to my premise, let's kind of talk about this. The first premise is that standards are necessary. Okay, yes, you kind of know that inherently, but is there a way to train students better to understand what standards and codes are before they get delivered into the real world? A couple years ago, I was at a conference and I was talking to a person from HR. I was at an engineering education conference, and they had their recruiter out there. Their HR person was looking for students to hire. And as I was talking to her, she said, we have to spend a year to train a new hire, the best candidates we can get, before we can actually put them into the market to work for us. And part of that is, and we were talking with Anzi at the time, part of what they said was they just don't know how to use standards the way we need to use them. So that's just an element of that year of training. But again, that's time and money. And if we can deliver students to these employers that are ready to go, then that enhances the value that you bring to your local community. And that can lead into other things like donations and funding and other things like that. Recently, I read an article where the CEO of Huntsman Corporation, Mr. Huntsman, said that they're so lacking in welders in the Lake Charles area, which is where a lot of oil and gas happens, they just can't fill the jobs, and they're missing out on opportunity. And to me, that says we all have an opportunity here if we can figure out a way to bring more people into the welding discipline, make them ready for the workforce when they leave. And this is just another way to say it's important to incorporate standards into the way you educate so that students walk out and are immediately productive, beyond just the activity. As we all know, standards, codes, they're ubiquitous in all the work we do around the world. And another thing to think about too is because we have a global market, AWS, in the time I've spent working with WEX and talking to Dennis and some of his colleagues at AWS, there's a market share battle going on. Lots of different standards bodies from around the world want you to use their code. I'm sure ISO would want you to do only ISO work. So there's a bit of a social economic business component to understanding standards. So this knowledge of understanding how standards fit into the way society works, and specifically in the way that specific areas of commerce work in the U.S. can actually play into an understanding in the business world. So this would have an application in the academic setting for the business schools, the study of economics and international trade. So you could actually, if you incorporate standards, spread it out to other departments beyond your department as well. The several hurdles I talk about this I know to be true. There's a study was done a few years ago, and ANSI, I believe, ran the study. They talked to a lot of standards development organizations. They talked to schools, and they found out that one of the challenges of incorporating standards into a curriculum is that they're too broad. I mean, how do you cover everything and make it meaningful? That is a real challenge, but you're welders, so I would suggest you think about AWS standards. But it is, in fact, a real obstacle. That also brings in the idea of we have a global marketplace, so which standards bodies do you cover? If you're able to do it, who do you cover? Do you cover all the world bodies, or how do you make those decisions? Because there just isn't enough time to effectively do it. Another challenge has been, and this gets a little more into the logistical side, is that typically standards are paper copies, and they're expensive, and we can't afford it, and if we did, then who do we give it to? And if we put it in a library, they get thumbed through, torn up, and next thing you know, we have to buy yet another expensive copy. If it's online, then there's typically single user or restricted permitted uses, restricted copyright uses allowed with that, so it doesn't really lend itself to an academic environment where you want to provide access to resources for all the students and faculty in an easy to use way. Technical documents are often too deep for students to grasp. This may be true at various levels, but beginning to incorporate that knowledge, utilizing other tools that are available, such as American Welding Online, can help overcome those obstacles as well. And then finally, this is a resource that isn't free. So how do you, in an already strapped economic environment, specifically in the education area where budgets are either held flat or actually decreased over time, how do you overcome that and bring on more resources? So I'd like to say, okay, let's look at the sunshine at the end of the tunnel, and that is there are ways that you can think about this. I'm not going to dictate to you how you should incorporate standards, but I think that's up to you as educators to say, okay, how do we better prepare our students so that they can go into an employer and they don't have to spend a year of time to bring them up to speed to deal with things. But you can go after funding sources, especially community colleges. There's a lot of available funding if you have programs that lend themselves to how they want to give money. This TAACCCT, Dennis can tell you what that stands for. I couldn't put it on one page, but that's a government funding program for community colleges that show that they have certification programs in place. There are corporate donors that are willing to support local schools that support their businesses. We heard that from Dave as well. And that happens everywhere around the country. You want to attract more students and make them ready for the workforce. To do that, if you have the right resources, then you can attract a broader array of students because they want to come to where they can get best suited and best prepared for going out into the real world. And I say be the Joneses. There's this idea, I've seen this happen before where schools compete against each other. I'll take the two. Let's go to Harvard and MIT. They compete on resources, and Harvard will not let MIT have something that they don't have because it draws students away from them. I think all schools are in that particular type of competition, and if you have the best resources, the best output, the best support from the community because you're doing that, then you're going to attract more students to be here. Obviously, Ivy Tech is on a very high growth curve, but if you get more students, obviously it translates into tuition revenue, and that's a good thing. And then, of course, we've heard about ATF and other ways that AWS can help you to create revenue-driving opportunities by creating programs that allow you to train, and training can be something that drives revenue for you as an institution. And ultimately, all these things combined should help you, hopefully help you accomplish the goal of creating the best student output that are ready to go into the workforce immediately. So let's make a quick case for AWS. I'm trying to get us back on time, Dennis. We all know, we all heard it. I think the facts are indisputable that there is high demand for welding all across North America and abroad. There's a shortage of qualified engineers, welding engineers, qualified welders, welding inspectors, and this creates opportunities for you in the education field. You know, I had my notes out here, and I'm like 15 pages behind. Winging it. The economy is forcing people to retool themselves. There's a lot of people out of work. We all know this. Don't want to belabor that point, but that creates opportunities for you as educators to help create programs that get people back into the workforce in a meaningful way. Grant money is available, and AWS has created a lot of programs to help you create programs here. And what I really want to talk about is how do we overcome the obstacles to get standards more widely available in the right way for academia, so that you can do the work of creating better students, of creating programs to credential professionals. So let me quickly talk about those and what it means. We have, and I'm going to talk about it in the online sense. We have paper standards are always available. We still have a very viable print business for the standards. It's typically used by the corporate world, where they have their own physical library, and they have very specific people who use standards on a routine basis. Although I will say that the use of electronic standards is growing in the corporate world. We have offered these LS subscriptions, leasing services. This is the first way that you can get online access to standards or electronic access. We call them the LS, which is short for licensed services or leasing services. A lease is basically a 12-month period of time. We have 3 different options. You can pick 25 standards that are relevant to the work that you want to do. You can pick 50, or you can get the whole portfolio. And those prices range from $8,500 per 12-month lease down to $3,200, which you may say, okay, that's still pretty expensive. What you can do with these standards from a permitted use standpoint, and this is where it starts to think about it from an academic standpoint. With the leasing services, you can print, view, share internally within a single site all the time, as much as you want. There's no restrictions on it, other than you can't resell them, and if we do, we'll track you down. But more importantly, what we've developed, and this, I can do a demo, but I'd actually, if you're interested in seeing this later, I'll be in the other room whenever you guys want to get a demo of this product that we've created in conjunction with AWS very recently. It's called AWS Academic Access. This is the full reference library for AWS publications. There's over 200 publications available. It's offered to academic institutions only. By academic institutions, I mean degree-granting institutions. In other words, we're not going to give this to the corporate world or to the government world. We want this specific for academic institutions. So what this is, yes?
What about trade schools?
Trade schools are part of the academic world. So, but you're certifying, which we roll under. We can always have that discussion. But here's what this product is. It's read-only access for students. Okay, in other words, they're not allowed to download anything. But again, for the purpose of educating and helping them prepare, they have the ability to peruse, read. You can assign certain standards to be read. This is not meant to be a curriculum. It's meant to supplement and enhance your curriculum or the work that you're creating for your students. As a faculty member, you can download, read and download. We give faculty permission to download. The way that happens is each university site has its IP address, which is basically its electronic mailbox. So we register the IP address. If you're a user from within that range, that IP range, then when you click onto the Academic Access link, it opens it up and you can search and look all you want. If you're a faculty member, then if you want to print, it'll ask you for a login ID and password, which as a faculty, we establish a login ID and password for each institution. As long as you're within the IP address, you can log in, download what you need to use for your coursework, and so forth. This is a 12-month subscription service. The prices range from $750 up to $2,500 depending on the type of school you are, high school up to university. And there are embedded breaks in there for SENS members as well as educational institutional members as well. So we've tried to make this something that's fittable within an academic budget. I can tell you from other products I've worked on, a typical subscription like this would cost about 50 grand from, like, say, the American Chemical Society, and they wouldn't negotiate. So this, in my opinion, is very reasonable. Now, if you have multiple sites, Ivy Tech, we can work out a multi-site program with you. This is a per-site price, but if we get into a multi-site organization or even an academic consortium, we'll work with you on that and do our best. The key here is that we want to get you to resources that enhance your ability to develop students that are workforce ready. So we're trying to make this affordable and just basically cover our costs. AWS is a nonprofit. I like to call it not for loss. WEX is a for-profit company, but when it comes to the academic environment, our goal is to really, we look at it as a push-through marketing strategy. We want students to be prepared because when they go out in the corporate world, those corporations become actually the customers that we want to attract and bring in to buy the standards at the full price. So that's our strategy. There's the website there. Another thing I should mention, if you're interested in seeing a demo, I'll have this available. It's as simple a search platform as you'll ever get. It's almost, I call it the Gump platform. But it's very intuitive, very easy to use, simple. But if you have an interest to trial it, we can set up a 2-week trial for you as an individual at an organization. If you want to set up a trial for campus-wide, then we can also do that as well. And we put those for a limited duration, and of course at the end of the trial, we expect that you're going to buy, and we'd be happy to take your order. So the other thing that I'm not going to belabor is the ATF program. That's been talked about a lot, but this is a great way to generate revenue and increase the value that your organization brings to your community. And of course, that can be supplemented by AWS Academic Access, which we really want you to buy. So, conclusions. There's too much text in my presentation. That's the first conclusion. Second, using standards is important. And try to think of ways that you can do that. We're trying to make it available for you in a way that supports the academic community. Employers want students to be more knowledgeable. This has been validated over and over. AWS is here to help. WEX, as part of AWS, as a strategic partner, we're here to help you as well. If there's any questions on AWS publications, please see me. My contact information's on this. I'm here all week, and we're ready to help you. So don't be shy to ask questions. We'll do what we can to make sure that we can help you. So thank you.